Revolution of Man podcast. I'm your host, Lance Cashion. The Revolution of Man podcast is an extension of my blog at revolutionofman.org. So you can visit my blog and read some stuff that I've written, and also take a listen to previous episodes of the podcast. Also have a lot of resources there as well. So thank you for tuning in. You can find me on X at Lance Cashion, also on Instagram at Lance Cashion, and I'm also the founder and CEO of the Forge Room Foundation. We equip, activate, and connect Christians to critical areas in our city to transform culture and bring God glory in the place where we live here in Fort Worth, Texas. So if you're interested in learning more about the Forge Room, go to forgeroom.org. Just a reminder to everyone, we are making our big push for the end of the year through our giving campaign. We're going to raise $100,000 to expand our capabilities, to mobilize Christians to all these areas of need in our city. And you can go to forgeroom.org and look at our strategy and plan called Forged for the City. Also, I'm an elder at King's Cross Fellowship here in Fort Worth, Texas. And so if you happen to be in the area, go to kingscrossfellowship.com and you can find out more about our church. In this week's episode, I'm going to be interviewing Tyler Durham, talking about his life. He played professional baseball, and then he went into full-time ministry. And you're going to hear all about his story and hear how that transformation took place in his life. This is episode 16, and my guest is Tyler Durham. And I hope you enjoy it. Please like it, share it, comment on all the various platforms, and you can always find me at revolutionofman.org or forgeroom.org. Thank you for listening. See ya. So last week we discussed kind of my story, my life from being a DJ to a pastor. I entitled that episode "Holy Ruckus." I don't know what we're going to title
a book
this.
Somewhere in there, from DJ to pastor.
So I'm here with Tyler Durham again, and this week we're going to talk about your story. You've got a couple of themes there. Really, something I want to focus on, fascinated with, is your life in baseball, and then that transition into full-time ministry.
Yep.
So we're both from Fort Worth. But we didn't really know each other because we're about 4 years.
We have so many mutual friends, but for whatever reason, our paths, at least we don't remember our paths crossing.
Yeah. So we grew up in the same town, and we just, probably 4 years is a lot of time when you're younger, though. If you think back to when you're like 14 and 18, there's a big difference between
no
that.
Doubt.
But your story is fascinating because you you had a love for baseball and you were a professional baseball player. So how did that start? So you're obviously from Fort Worth, all that. So tell me about when this thing for baseball started. How did that start for you?
So I was the middle of three boys, and my dad, Rusty, he ran track in college, threw the javelin at Texas Tech, and was very, very successful and was a really good athlete. And so, with three boys, my dad went all in with the sports thing. And so he was a stockbroker for 20 years, and my mom and dad were very involved with a variety of things in Fort Worth. And, we early on were at Colonial Country Club, and they were doing the social thing. And then once we got older, my older brother's four years older than I am, once we got into those sports ages, they just dropped everything on that side, and it was all in with sports. And so we played, in the fall I wanted to be in the NFL. I dreamed of playing in the NFL. In the winter I dreamed of being in the NBA, and in the spring I dreamed of being a Major League Baseball player. And we lived on Sports Center, and sports was just our life. And as time progressed, I went to Westside Lions Little League, and my dad was really involved. And when I got to the age of 10, I'll never forget this. This was when select baseball really started breaking through in DFW, or at least in Fort Worth.
And what is select baseball?
So
for
select
people who don't know?
baseball. So Little League, you have a draft, and so you have your coaches, and they do a draft with all the kids that have registered to be in on teams. And so you don't get to assemble your own team. You have to pick from the players that are there. Select baseball is you get to go around and recruit and select individuals to be on your
what
your
age?
team.
About what age?
So
does this start to happen?
Now it's, I think they probably do it as young, probably around 9 or 10 years old.
Really? That
Yeah.
young?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm 10. Nobody that I knew of from Westside Lions had played select baseball, but this guy from Arlington who had a team called the Arlington Knights, his name was Jack Morris, I'll never forget him, came to our house, and he had the uniforms and the bat bags and he pitched me playing select baseball, and we decided to do that. And it was a big deal at Westside Lions because my dad was really involved. My older brother was a good player, and so me leaving Westside Lions was kind of a big deal.
So you were naturally gifted at playing baseball?
Yeah, I was a pitcher.
Okay.
Really good pitcher, not a great hitter when I was younger. And so went and played for this Arlington Knights team. Turns out Jack Morris, the coach, was not a great guy. By the end of the season, the parents voted him out. And eventually I think he got in trouble for abuse. And
oh, really?
He made every one of us cry in the field at one point.
Okay.
Just yelling at us, and it toughened me up for sure. But anyway, so that was my entrance into select baseball, and once we went into select, it was all over after that. My dad started a select baseball team called the Texas Panthers.
Okay. Just to throw back to Fort Worth, a little hat tip to Fort Worth.
Yeah, the Panther City. I remember the day we were at a Pizza Hut in Arlington, which eventually became Mama's Pizza, where my brother managed. But it was Pizza Hut at the time. And we're sitting in there with a napkin dreaming out the select baseball team, what colors the uniforms would be, what the mascot would be. It was red and black, and it was the Texas Panthers. Well, our team, my 12-year-old year, was stacked. My dad and two other coaches did a great job of selecting the team, and we ended up winning the 12-year-old Continental Amateur Baseball World Series up in Iowa. I can't remember the name of the city, but it was a big deal. And I think over 10 of the players on our team played Division I baseball. Several of us went on to play professional. One of them played in the major leagues with the Yankees, Kevin Thompson.
Okay.
We were stacked. And
this is when you're 12.
12. And I'm pitching.
That's just Texas for you.
It's totally Texas. And here's the negatives. I mean, all my favorite memories as a kid were from those baseball days of going on the road trips for the tournaments but my dad, unfortunately, was one of the dads that it was everything to him. And so I was a good pitcher, but I was throwing curveballs at 10 years old and, was over pitching. I remember between innings, I'd be crying because my arm was hurting so bad. And I mean, it was bad.
Yeah.
But when I was 13,
because you're still growing and throwing.
And so at 13, I remember throwing a ball from third base and my elbow popped, and the bursa sac in my elbow popped, and I had to sit out a year from throwing. And that was the beginning of all my arm trouble, which led to me focusing more on hitting in playing defense. Pitching, just I couldn't stay healthy with my arm. But fast forward, all that to say, we were totally all in with baseball family, and I went to a baseball school, Arlington Heights.
Right. And that's a high school here in Fort Worth.
High school here in Fort Worth. And Tommy Elliott was the coach, and he was already a legend.
Yeah, he was a great coach. I'm not a baseball guy, but I still
Probably
recognize the name. Yeah.
And my older brother played 4 years there. The year he left was the year I came in as a freshman, and they were like one game away from making it to the state tournament.
Okay.
My older brother, his senior year. And so that became something that, I want to go one step further than my older brother. It was always competition with me and my older brother growing up, and he was always hard on me. And my sophomore year, I was like a role player on the team, on the varsity team. I would play second base when the second baseman would pitch, Derek Gerald. And that sophomore year, we had a great senior class. We ended up going to state and winning the state tournament my sophomore year, which was really a lot of fun. And I spent the vast majority of the time on the bench, but man, it was phenomenal. And junior year, I had an okay year, but had broke my finger and then hurt my elbow, had bone chips in my elbow, and had to have surgery on that.
Same throwing arm.
Okay. Yeah. So that was more arm issues my junior year. And then my senior year, we went back to state and lost to Highland Park. They were stacked in the state tournament. And I was all state that year at second base, all regional. I had a phenomenal year, but I was a skinny little runt. Hadn't really hit my growth spurt, hadn't really matured. And so nobody was really looking at me. My dream was to go to Texas Tech or one of the big schools in Texas, and that was not their dream for me. And so ended up going to Angelina Junior College in Lufkin, Texas, and played there, and then went on to Northwestern State University, played 2 years there. And I'm going to fast forward through the baseball part, and then we can go back and talk more about it if we want. But played 2 years at Northwestern State, had never heard of either of those schools previous to them reaching out to me. And Northwestern State was awesome. My head coach, my junior year at Northwestern State, was a phenomenal baseball coach. He ended up taking Mississippi State to the World Series several years later and became the AD of, I think, Mississippi State, and now he's the AD of, I think, Auburn. And you could just tell he knew what he was doing. And so I chose Northwestern State. I was getting recruited by other schools. TCU was recruiting me, but at that time, they weren't a great program. It was before Schlossnagel, who took them to the World Series. But anyways, Coach Cohen really impressed me, and so I went to Northwestern State. We won conference both years, had a lot of success, and was drafted in the 37th round after my senior year, and by the St. Louis Cardinals, and played 2 years with the Cardinals. Loved every minute of it, and then was released in 2004 from the St. Louis Cardinals, and then went back and coached at my alma mater, Northwestern State, and was going to go the coaching route. This whole period, I was known as Tyler, the baseball player. I would not go on school trips. I would not do a lot of things because, hey, I had to practice.
Baseball was your life.
Baseball was my life. And baseball was my identity, too. And so I struggled with that, and it was through those injuries that I had. I had another surgery when I was in junior college. The funny bone
arms.
Nerve, right arm, that funny bone nerve. I'd be sitting in my apartment at school, and my hand would just go numb.
Right.
And I was like, man, something's wrong.
So you had multiple injuries to that arm.
Yeah.
By the time you were in your early 20s.
Yeah, I had multiple. Yeah.
In surgeries.
2 surgeries, and so pitching was like easy for me as a kid. I always had a good arm, and I was very accurate, and I loved it, and I was confident. Hitting, I always struggled to be confident. And I had to learn how to hit as I got older because pitching was no longer in the cards. And I love baseball so much that it's like, well, I'm going to have to adjust. But anyways, was drafted by the Cardinals, played 2 years with them, and was Tyler the baseball player. And so after I was released everybody just knew I was going to go into coaching. So I moved back to my alma mater and enrolled in the graduate program for sports administration, and was going to be. I finished that. This was in 2004. The spring of 2004, I was released in spring training, which was down in West Palm Beach, and then finished that year as a volunteer assistant at Northwestern State for the baseball program, and that was the path. Loved baseball. Baseball was my passion. Knew baseball. Was very knowledgeable. Had success in it, and was set up to be successful as a coach. I played for John Cohen, who became an AD. My senior year, when he left, I played for a guy named Mitch Gaspard, and that's who I went back to coach with. So I was on the path, and coaching is a difficult path. You got to really take your lumps, and you got to move around a lot.
Right.
Coaches move a lot. And so that was my baseball period.
So what was it about baseball from when you were a little kid? Like, what was it that you grabbed? I mean, obviously you were gifted with it, but what was it about baseball that really pulled you into that sport?
Man, I think success as a young kid obviously was a part of it. You know, I didn't play for basketball teams that were that good. I didn't have as much success in other sports.
Yeah.
I played 7th grade football, and I weighed like 100 pounds. And I'll never forget, for some odd reason, this is at Monique Middle School in Fort Worth. The 7th grade coach put me as running back and linebacker. And I'm telling you, I don't know if there's footage out there, but if you saw me, it would look like a fungo bat with a giant helmet on it. And I wasn't fast.
Toothpick and a marshmallow. That's what I look like, because I played football too.
Yeah, that's what it was.
And I was like 100 pounds.
But what am I doing
Barely.
at linebacker? I should have been on the bench. But I'll never forget playing Meadowbrook Middle School. They had a running back, and his legs were like tree trunks. And we were out in the open field, and it's just me and him, and he just runs over me.
Right.
Just
You're
lights
supposed
me
to
up.
tackles him. He tackles you
me and keeps going. And I'm like blacked out. There was one time on a punt return or something where I got lit up, and I'm seeing stars, and I'm just like, this is, I'm not good at it, and I'm just physically not able to do it. So I never played football in high school. After 7th grade, I'm like, football's out of the question.
Yeah.
Loved basketball, but just didn't have the success I had as I did in baseball. And my dad loved baseball. Yeah. We collected baseball cards as a kid. My dad collected cards.
My dad and I did that too. I've got a bunch of those cards in my...
You ought to go back to them. Some of those might be worth something. But my dad had a whole closet full of baseball cards that if we still had today would be worth a lot of money. But we haven't. But so I think some of it was me trying to please my dad too, and so baseball just became the natural thing. And then what I've seen with a lot of young guys is, you dabble with these different sports, and then once you have a taste of success, or you start getting affirmation for your play, then you really get invested in it. And so it wasn't until probably my sophomore year in high school that I really got invested in baseball. And so that's really what led me into it. But it just, now I know I'm a very analytical person and kind of intellectually driven, and baseball's a thinking sport.
That would make sense for a pitcher as well, because you're constantly thinking as a pitcher.
You got a strategy and
not that other players aren't, but specifically because that's where the game starts as soon as that
and that's a good point. And that's why I felt confident, because I felt like I was in control. I dictated what happened. As a hitter, you're kind of reacting.
Right.
And I just never felt as comfortable hitting as I did pitching, and I think that's probably a big part of it. But that's what led me into it, and I just loved it. And baseball, I think some of it, I'm a glutton for punishment. Baseball is not there's so much failure involved. And for me, I've always been attracted to the process more than the actual event. I loved the oh, I failed. Now I've got to figure out how to solve the problem. Even I've gotten into bow hunting. Way more failure hunting on public land with bow hunting than success. But it's like, I don't know. That's what gets me excited about it is
that the probabilities of failure are so high that you have to try to do it.
And then the pain of failure.
Yeah.
In some ways, that's what motivates me. What got me into hunting was I missed a shot with a rifle. And I'm like, how did that happen? And then it sent me down the rabbit hole of trying to fix a problem. And so baseball's very much like that because there's a lot of problems.
Right. Right.
A lot of failure.
So when you got released from the Cardinals in spring training of 2004, what did that feel like to get? So you had this dream, right? You had all at the same time you've had these injuries, which your career-ending injury could have happened really when you were like younger, 13 or 14. When you had that first injury, and then it was like a line of injuries to your pitching arm, which is kind of your bailiwick. That's your specialty.
That was
what did it feel like then to get released? Like what was going through your head? Like take me to that moment where you're living in this dream of what you thought you were built to do, which is to play baseball.
Yep.
And then I imagine it wasn't sudden. Maybe it was. So bring us into that moment of when you got released.
So
or maybe what led up to it, rather.
Late high school and then into college, at the same time that I'm experiencing some success in baseball, I started getting more serious about my faith and what it is that I believe. And so I had a lot of like ups and downs in my faith during this season and during those years, those formative years. And secondly, I also was dealing with severe anxiety and depression.
Okay.
And I think now looking back, it was anxiety which led to depression. I'm not by nature a depressed person, but when something's happening to you that you don't understand and it's affecting the things you used to enjoy, you're going to get depressed.
Yeah.
All the things that used to make me happy, I struggle to do now. Well, you're not going to be a very happy person. And so, baseball, my faith, and then this battle with anxiety were all happening at the same time. And so if I showed you pictures of these years of baseball, you would think I'm the happiest guy in the world. But internally, I was really struggling. And so after my sophomore year in junior college, I went on a mission trip to an 8-week mission trip, 4 weeks in Nicaragua, and then 4 weeks in Mexico with Athletes in Action, which is a baseball ministry. You play these local villages. They put together an all-star team. Mm-hmm. There's like a 50-year-old guy at shortstop and then a 13-year-old kid at second and a horse in center field. I mean, it was crazy. It was so much fun. And it was the most free I've ever felt playing baseball because the goal wasn't your performance. It was sharing the gospel after the game. But I went on this trip and I didn't want to go because I'm dealing with this anxiety and I've never been out of the country. But I just was like, I have to go. You can't not go if this opportunity is presented. And it was such a great trip, but it was a real battle. So my faith is growing. I'm having ups and downs with my faith, battling sin and dealing with anxiety. And so all that's going in the background. Well, I get drafted and I'm playing with the Cardinals and having a blast. There's some Christian guys on both teams I played for the 2 years I played there, and we kind of looked out for each other. And when we would fall off the horse, help each other get back on. Minor league locker room's not a great place to try to be a committed Christian. So there's so many threads, but so my senior year in college, I started dating a girl. And we got serious, and there were red flags the whole time, but I just pushed through them. And during my time with the Cardinals, I'm still dating this girl. It's a long-distance relationship, and it really affected my performance as I look back. I think about it, and so I'm dealing with that relationship drama. And then after my second year with the Cardinals, I'm dealing with the relationship drama, and I end up having to have 2 hernia surgeries in the off season. Mm-hmm. Had 5 hernias.
Wow.
And so I had 1 surgery to fix 3 of them. And I'll never forget this. They put the anesthesia in me, and they're wheeling me to the back. And one of the last things I said was, I think I have more on the other side. Could you fix those too? And then I'm good. I remember that because I had this gut feeling that I think what they're saying I have on this side, I'm having on the other side too. I could just tell.
Yeah.
But the ship had already sailed. So we had the surgery, and I'm doing the recovery, and I'm feeling pain on the other side. Mm-hmm. So I go back to the doctor, and he's like, yeah, you have 2 other ones on the other side. So they fixed 3 on the one side, went right back into surgery, fixed the other 2. And so that whole off season is really rehab. And so I go to spring training in 2004, and I'm not doing good. You know, new guys are coming in, they're bigger, they're stronger. I kind of took a step back. And so in spring training, I'm not doing well. Ended up running out of ball to first base and pulled my groin. And so I'm on the disabled list, and everybody's like, oh, they're not going to release you while you're disabled. They're going to get you through, and then they'll release you. Well, they released me while I was on the disabled list, and so I was kind of done mentally.
Yeah.
I was still injured. I wasn't healthy. I wasn't at my peak. My arm I still had all kinds of issues with my arm. And so I was totally at peace with being released. You know, I was sad, obviously. It was my whole life, and, you know, the dream is over. But there was another side of me that's like, it needed to happen. And so a lot of guys try to hang on. They try to get on with another team or play independent baseball. I didn't do that. I knew I was done. And I thought I was going to go into coaching. So when I got that little slip in my locker that morning, and it said, go see Bruce Mano, who was the head of player development, before you get dressed, part of me was like, I didn't realize what was happening. But then it set in, oh, I'm getting released.
Yeah.
Oh, this is me. It's my turn. Because, you know, in spring training, you have these, you know, every week there's a cut day. Mm-hmm. Well, that was me on cut day. It took me a while for it to register.
Yeah.
So I go in and talk to Bruce Mano, and the whole script, this is the hardest part of my job, but we got to let you go. And plane ticket was waiting upstairs. Went out with my buddies that night, and, you know, and then the next morning I left, and
never to return to baseball.
Never to return to professional baseball.
Yeah, professional baseball. So did so it seems like that through the injuries and these other circumstances, it was your identity being grounded in being a baseball player. God kind of removed that.
Would
did. That be
I think
accurate?
That's fair. I started reading a lot more during this season. Started reading books. A lot of what got me into reading was trying to figure out this whole anxiety thing.
Okay. So what type of, what do you mean you're reading for the anxiety thing? So what?
So I'm
reading
like,
for like pleasure, or you're reading to find out?
Both.
Okay.
Both. Because reading was kind of an escape in downtime. You know, when I'm playing baseball, I'm not thinking about the anxiety. It was the downtime. And so reading would be an escape. Mm-hmm. And I'd used alcohol before as an escape. And now that I'm really trying to be serious about my faith, it's like I don't want to do that anymore. And so reading was a big part of that. But also reading, going to like Christian bookstores and looking for books that have to do with peace and anxiety and the Christian life. Like, how do I get over this? Mm-hmm. And that was really the catalyst for my deep love of learning and books. Was, you know, it helped me understand what was going on in my life, reading these books, and obviously reading the Bible. And I just went down the rabbit hole, and it led me to people like the Puritans, you know, who were from the 1600s. And I felt like they were saying things that were resonating with what I was going through, and they were giving me remedies that, you know, I went down the self-help books, you know, the business books, the Power of Positive Thinking. I read Norman Vincent Peale. I went down that rabbit hole of the self-help even New Age stuff, of just anything that makes these feelings go away. And it was all like kind of superficial. But when I started getting into like the Puritans, it's like, oh, they're understanding me at a
medicine for the heart.
Yeah, and they were known as physicians of the soul. The Puritans are uniquely known as physicians of the soul. And I'm like, they're telling me things that they're hitting me at a deeper level than anybody else. And that was a big part of that season for me. And then at the same time, I was reading books on leadership, really got into the leadership world, because I'm going into coaching.
Yeah.
And I want to be a good leader. And so I'm reading the John Maxwell books. But I really awakened for the first time my deep love of learning in that season.
So while you were, did you have any mentors along the way? Were there guys in your life that, like, as you were, you've seen this kind of this dream, not really die, but get taken away from you being a professional baseball player. Now you're moving into coaching, but you're also on this journey with God, pursuing God. Were there who was influencing you?
Yeah.
Do you have any mentors?
I had a college pastor my sophomore year at Angelina Junior College in Lufkin. His name was Mark Allen, and he took me under his wing, and he had a really good college ministry my sophomore year, and that was when I really started struggling with anxiety, when I was 19. Mm-hmm. After my freshman year at Angelina, I had surgery on my elbow, and that off season I moved back to Fort Worth, hanging out with my old buddies. Now I have no excuse. I can't be Tyler the baseball guy because I just had surgery.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to fit in, and I'm partying every night. I'm getting drunk every night. And every morning I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. And then that night I'm like, I'm only going to drink 2 or 3 beers. And that night I get hammered.
Yeah.
And it got so bad at one point, I remember, because I was doing physical therapy in the morning for my arm. And I remember one morning I was in the shower and I just started throwing up blood.
Oh, wow.
That's how, and I was like, dude, this is not good.
That's not typically a good sign.
No. and I'm like, I mean, I went all in that summer with the party.
I mean,
stuff.
that's a significant situation
That was bad.
right there.
And that was a real wake-up call. But some of it's like, and I think a lot of Christians maybe deal with this. You experience this freedom in Christ, and, you kind of like let your guard down, and you don't realize that that's when you become public enemy number 1 to Satan. Right. And I'm like, man, I'm free. I've experienced forgiveness. That freshman year in college, I was just walking on cloud 9, and I come back home and I'm feeling this. It's almost like an arrogance. I can do whatever I want. And I remember one night my buddies were like, man, why don't you come, smoke weed with us? And I had done it once before my senior year, but I hadn't been drinking when I did it. This time I was very drunk. Mm-hmm. And then I did, anytime they have a name for something, this contraption they created had a name. Uh-huh. And I did it, and it like really messed me up.
Right.
And it's funny. It's like that really intensified my feeling of I've lost the path. And that's when the anxiety, like what I felt that night, didn't go away.
Okay.
Like the next day, you sober up. Well, I still felt anxiety.
Right.
And I felt like I lost my purpose. What am I doing? And got really confused. And so that's when it all began. I'd always been an anxious kid, but that's when it kind of resurfaced. And it wasn't an anxiety that was connected to anything. It just was now a new companion I had to live with. And there was no remedy. There's no way to make it go away. It could come up at any moment in time. Mm-hmm. And so I had to start controlling my environment.
Which is next to impossible.
And so when I went back to school at Angelina my sophomore year, I need to get plugged into a church ASAP. And this college pastor came along and really mentored me and gave me some books on the Christian life that really started. That's when I started like, okay, I got to figure out how to make this go away. I want to be more committed to Christ. And you know, what's dangerous in those moments is you start to think, okay, this is punishment for my bad behavior. You know, I'm sinning. So God's going to take this away when I meet his standards. So I've got to read my Bible every morning, and I've got to do this list of things, and then this will go away.
So the pendulum swung from this freedom,
bingo,
like the cheap grace type of freedom of I've
saved,
got the Lord, I'm arrogant about self-righteous, all those things, and then it swings to like a legalistic.
That's exactly what happened. I couldn't even be around alcohol. You have alcohol, get it away from me. Mm-hmm. You know, because I thought that God was punishing me for abusing that grace, and the only way that punishment would go away is if I meet his standards. And so
which is impossible,
and
by
it's
the way.
Another form of slavery.
Move from one bondage to another.
So you know, in some ways I think back in my story, I'm like, I'm a complicated person, I feel like. But what was so you swing the pendulum the other way, and what's your remedy after that doesn't work? I'm just not going to care anymore. Mm-hmm. And so I went through this period where I don't want to think about God. I don't want to talk about God. I just want to control my environment to make this feeling go away. And God hadn't helped. So I'm just going to try. And it was a tough period. And so I had a mentor then, but that was just
and how old were you at around
19, 20?
Okay.
Didn't tell anybody. My mentor never told him that this was going on the inside. The only person that knew was my mom and dad. My brothers didn't know. I'm sure they knew from my parents probably talked to him. But mm-hmm. if there's anybody listening that struggles with anxiety or any mental illness or struggle on that level, you know, humble yourself and immediately tell somebody that you trust something's not right. Yeah. I did not do that. I was embarrassed. I didn't want to tell my coach because it could affect my baseball career. Yeah. I didn't want to tell my pastor because he might think I'm not a good Christian because I'm struggling with these things. I didn't want to tell my girlfriend later on because she would judge me. And it was all just me and this inner demon.
So you think it was shame that was...
Yeah, shame and pride.
And pride, yeah.
Yeah, shame and pride. So... So I had that mentor at Angelina. Then when I went to Northwestern State, I had an FCA director, Fellowship of Christian Athletes. He and his wife were like second parents to me. Okay. His wife, Miss Rose Long, who ended up discipling my wife, Oriani.
Really? Yeah.
They were the FCA directors in Central Louisiana, and they just invited me into their home. I can't tell you how many nights I'd be over there, you know, upset with girl stuff, or I would call Miss Rose at the worst times and she would answer every time. I remember when I was playing with the Cardinals, I was in the stairwell of the stadium in Peoria, really nice stadium, crying on the phone, talking to Miss Rose because of stinking girl issues with my girlfriend.
Yeah.
And I'm like, the patience of that lady. I mean, how did she not just go get it together and, you know, figure it out? She didn't do that. So that was a key person in my life. And then later on, when I got into the ministry, I had a lot of mentors. But early on, most of my mentors were mentors in regards to baseball, not the spiritual life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So so before we go into the ministry track, because now you're now moving. God's moving you into what would end up being ministry. What would you recommend, or your advice to young athletes or parents of young athletes, Christian parents of young athletes that have a gifted child that, you know, they could be potentially a professional hockey player, baseball.
Yeah, whatever.
Doesn't matter the sport.
Or even gifted at anything. They could be a gifted musician.
Yeah.
Or like Lily is really, really gifted at ballet.
Right.
Nobody cares about how good your kid is at 11, 12, 13, 7, 8. Nobody cares. There's this temptation for parents, as we all know, to live through their kids. And they make these tournaments, the win-loss record, they make all that the main thing, and nobody cares. Nobody cares that we won the Continental Amateur Baseball Association World Series, at 12. Nobody cares.
Yeah.
The trophy, I have no clue if we still have the trophy.
Yeah.
And it probably was $10 to make.
Yeah.
The memories are unbelievable. Like I still have friendships with some of these guys. But and the 12-year-old doesn't care at the end of the day to reach these unbelievable goals. They just want to have fun. So focus on having fun and just creating experiences for your kids that they will enjoy. There were a lot of painful memories with me in baseball too, where I wanted to quit because I was so burned out. I felt so much pressure from my dad that I just wanted to quit. And I'll give you one story.
Yeah.
To make this point. I think I'm getting the cough that other, that's been going around. So I apologize for the coughing. But I was 13 and we were playing in a tournament and I had one of the worst games I've ever had. I was 0 for 3 with 3 strikeouts. I dropped 2 fly balls at third base. And my dad was just lighting me up in the dugout, screaming at me.
So your dad's your coach.
Dad's my coach.
Right.
The dugouts,
13 years old.
The dugouts are, it's chain link fence so everybody can see in.
Right. Everybody can hear.
Everybody can hear. He is screaming at me and I start crying. I'm embarrassed. And after that game, one of the kids on our team, 13-year-old, one of the teenagers, his granddad came to the game. And his granddad went up to my dad after the game and lit him up.
Really?
Gotten this little bitty old granddad. My dad's 6'4", had a, Tom Selleck Magnum PI mustache. He looked very intimidating. Mm-hmm. And he goes up and he lights him up and just rebukes him for his behavior. Well, we got in the car, me and my dad. It was just me and my dad. And my dad starts weeping.
Wow.
Like snot coming out of the nose weeping. I'm embarrassed. I don't know what to do. And he apologizes and he just, like that granddad broke him. And, as a kid, I'm like, I want to make this stop, with my dad. I feel bad. And so I kind of...
he feels worse probably than
so I'm like,
you did.
I'm like, don't worry about it, Dad. I don't care. It's okay. The reality is I did care and it's not okay, but I just wanted to make that go away. Mm-hmm. And so I just kind of, blame myself for that event happening. Like if I wouldn't have had that bad game, then my dad wouldn't have been feeling bad.
Right.
And so that's been my biggest struggle to this day is that I was taught subconsciously in my relationship with my dad that my worth is based on my performance.
Yeah.
And when I would play good, my dad was so much fun to be around. He was happy. Let's go get a steak dinner. But when I played bad, it was not good. And my friends on my teams would joke about it. Like, ooh, Tyler went 0 for 3. It's going to be a tough night. It's one of those deals. And so my whole identity was based, my acceptance and legitimacy was based on my performance.
And it sounds like some of his identity was tied into you as well.
To my performance.
Right.
And my brother's performances. And so my older brother handled that by just giving my dad the middle finger. Mm-hmm. I'm going to try to make you mad. My younger brother handled it by saying, I'm just not going to care. Maybe if I don't care, he'll back off. Me, fortunately and unfortunately, I chose the path of I'm going to meet his expectations. I can make him happy. And that's
which all of those are
dangerous
no-win
path.
all of
All
those
of
are
them.
no-win
All of them.
situations. Yeah.
And so a lot of the alcohol abuse that I had, a lot of the anxiety, I think a lot of that is built on my worldview that was shaped as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would just tell parents, like, number one, create experiences where your kids are going to have good memories and have fun, and number two, nobody cares about if you win or lose at 12, 13. Number three, it's my last one, unless I think of another one. Number three, evaluate the performance of your child based on what they can control. For example, in baseball, if I hit a line drive, just crushed it, and it went straight to the shortstop, for my dad, that's just an out. I did everything right. It was a good swing. I hit it right on the sweet spot of the bat. I did everything I could do, and I succeeded in that sense. It just so happened that it went to the shortstop instead of 5 feet over.
Yeah.
I can't control that. But for my dad, that just is 0 for 1.
Right. Measuring the wrong things. Like, what my dad or what any parent should measure is the things that your kid can control. So I want my children to experience failure, and I want to see how they respond to it. And if they stay positive, then after the game, that's like, way to go, high five. I love how you responded to that mistake. Good job. Mm-hmm. You didn't start making it about yourself. You didn't get selfish. You didn't start blaming others. Hey, you made a mistake. It's going to happen again. Or you hit a weak ground ball to the pitcher, but you run full speed to first base, 100%. That's a win. Yeah.
That's a great job, son. You're going to hit another dinker to the pitcher again. It's going to happen a million more times. But if you hit a dinker to the pitcher and you start cussing and you run 50% to first base, that is what should be punished. That is what you should, after the game, say, son, I was disappointed.
Because you're grounded in character.
It's character, and you made a choice that you can control. You can't control that you hit a dinker to the pitcher, but you could control to run 100%, and you chose to give 50%. Mm-hmm. If you teach your kids to focus on what they can control in ballet, in music, in sports, in school, then you're empowering them to focus on the right things. Mm-hmm. And to take responsibility for their actions. If you start measuring things they can't control, that's when they start blame shifting.
Yeah.
And that's when they start worrying about things that they literally have no control over, and it's going to affect their performance negatively.
Yeah, I remember getting a piece of advice from someone regarding girls and women is that you don't compliment them on immutable characteristics, like their looks.
Yep.
Necessarily, you say, "Oh, you look beautiful." That's one thing, but you say that's your wife, your daughter.
Yep.
But you don't make appearance
their value.
The value is that what you do is you look for the intrinsic value of character.
I love that.
In particularly in women and girls, because most of the world just looks at their appearance.
That's a great point.
And you break through, you pierce that lie with the truth about their character.
Yep.
Of something about you don't make something up. You have to find it.
Yep.
You have to discover that in their character, and then you pay the compliment to that part of their character, something that they can cultivate. That's not immutable. It's not their physical appearance.
That's a great point, because something could happen that could take away that physical appearance.
Right.
Baseball is actually a terrible place. Sports is a terrible place for parents to give their kids their identity, because for the vast majority of people, I was one of the rare ones that got to play professional baseball, but my career was over.
And what are the probabilities even getting to where you were?
0.00 whatever.
Right.
And even that, it's like my career was over at 23.
Gosh.
And so I had to rebuild my identity and learn how to be a normal person. And so,
which is still something you're working on
every day. And that's why I have people like you in my life to make sure I'm still working on that. The other thing with parents is I hold, and I know there's disagreement on this. You have like, there's a book, I forgot the name of it. Maybe you can put it in the show notes. But this author compares two different ways to raise your kids when it comes to sports: the Tiger Woods way or the Roger Federer way. You know, the one of the greatest tennis players of all time. Tiger Woods was swinging a golf club at like 2. He was on Johnny Carson at 3 years old, hitting the golf. His parents decided to build his life around golf from day one. Roger Federer was the opposite. I don't think he started playing tennis until later in life. His parents chose to give him a multitude of experiences, the generalist. So you have the generalist approach, or you have the specialization approach. And the Federer's like he learned how to play baseball. I'm making some of the, I don't remember the exact sports, but just think of it for our context.
Multiple
in Fort
sports.
Worth. Yeah, play baseball, do gymnastics as a kid, play basketball, try this, try that, and then you don't need to rush to specialize. Become a generalist, and then when you get older and there seems to be a pathway that opens and you love this particular sport, then that's when you specialize. And I think that creates more well-balanced, and what this book shows is, even in most cases, more successful person at that sport. College coaches love to see players at a high school that have multiple
sports experience.
Yeah, because they're more athletic, generally speaking.
Yeah, I find particularly Christian athletes, Tim Tebow, fascinating because he obviously he was a great quarterback, played a couple different sports, but he never allowed the sport to define his identity. It was always a platform for the gospel, because he always knew
he's one of the rare
that
guys.
he's gonna someday you're not gonna be able to play football. And if you're a football player, well, that's just what I do, and it was always a platform. For sharing the God. It was his platform for his witness. And, I think there's a lesson in that particularly for young athletes, parents talking about, if you're a professional athlete, golf, you can go long. Baseball, you can go, reasonably long. Football, like 35, you're done. You still have half your life.
You're probably a Hall of Famer if you're playing football at 35.
Yeah, but you're probably done closer to 30, more than likely. So you're retired if you ever make it. So it's, what are you going to do after? Is saying, like, this can't be your life.
Tebow was seamless. Tebow just seamlessly moved into his nonprofit.
But that's because his identity was not in what he was doing.
He was well-rounded.
The platform for his witness. He was like, so whether I'm playing football or baseball, it's a platform for my witness. That's if we can cultivate that into a child's heart and give them a vision for that, and say, whatever I do, if I'm a scientist or I'm an attorney, it's like, I may not be able to do those things forever. I will eventually not be able to play baseball. I will eventually not be able to, like my son does, karate. You can do that for a long time, but you can get an injury and you're done.
And it's not who you are.
It's not who you are. But if it's a platform for your witness and you enjoy it, if it's like, I think of Eric Little, the Olympian runner, that he would run looking up at the sky, and people would kind of make fun of him and say,
Awkward
"Why are you?"
running.
Yeah, he would look up and he said, why do you run looking up at the sky? Why aren't you looking at the track, your competition?" He said, "Because I feel God's pleasure when I'm running." And I'm glorifying God essentially as I run. And I'm like, great. That's the best answer of.
And his biggest rival, I forgot his biggest rival's name, but his biggest rival was the opposite. His whole life was built on track.
Right.
And he never reached the levels that Eric Liddell reached. And I think part of that's because the pressure he put on himself. He burned out. He fizzled out because his whole life he had to reach that goal, or else he was a failure. Eric Liddell's like, I'm doing this because I know it pleases God, and the moment it doesn't, I'm gone.
Yeah, and then
See
he
ya.
became a missionary.
Yeah, missionary to China.
He didn't compete on a Sunday because it was the Sabbath. It's like the Olympics or something very important race or world championships, and he would not race on a Sunday, and he had to forfeit.
Yeah,
he's like, it's not important. It's like, what's the most important thing, or who is the most important thing? If it's God, then everything else gets ordered
and that's
under
such
that.
a rare thing, and that's a good way for us to move into me going to the ministry.
So let's talk about, we've talked about the baseball career, and now, by God's providence, you've had some injuries. Eventually you get released from the Cardinals. You now are going into this coaching path. So where did take us from coaching to now you started
so the
in
coaching
the ministry?
path was just like a little small parenthesis.
It's a
snippet.
Yeah.
I'd been giving hitting lessons for years before that, and continued to do some coaching after that. But in terms of a career path, it was just that spring. I finished out the year that spring, and then the FCA director I mentioned, Gerald Long.
This guy that was mentoring you.
Yep, he and his wife, Miss Rose. The summer of 2004, he's like, hey, it's the off season, for baseball. And I wasn't an assistant coach. So I wasn't traveling to recruit. So we were doing camps in the summer, and that was it. So I had a lot of downtime, and I needed to make money. And so he's like, why don't you, there's an opening role for a youth pastor just for the summer at a little church called Amwell Baptist Church. It was about 45 minutes from Natchitoches, Louisiana, where I was living. Northwestern State University is in Natchitoches, and it's a tiny church on Toledo Bend Lake, and which is on the border of Texas and Louisiana.
Yeah,
and so I'm like, sure, okay. And I'd done FCA camps and had worked with kids a lot, and my faith in this season was growing.
So it wasn't something that was completely foreign.
No,
to
I'm
you
like,
at all.
yeah, I could. Hang out with these kids and I was also like really taking steps in my faith. I'd broken up with that girlfriend, which was good for both of us, frankly. And I was singularly focused on really growing in my faith, still doing the coaching thing. So it's like, sure. And so the first night out there, there's like 60 people on Sunday morning at the church. And with our church plant, now that sounds like a big church.
Yeah.
Just a few months ago, it was like 60 people. It was tiny. But my first night with the youth group, there's 2 kids that showed up. And this town called Zwolle, Louisiana, is on the lake. And so you have relatively wealthy people that have lake houses, but the locals all lived in trailer homes, or most of them. And it was rough. So
there was a contrast between
huge. A lot of drugs, a lot of meth.
So the train tracks analogy across the track makes a lot.
Exactly. Yeah. And my target audience were these younger families with kids that were in middle school and high school, not the older people that lived on the lake. So I quickly realized these kids are rough, and they're desperate to get out of here, and they can't believe somebody like me is giving them attention. And so I get the church van, and I just start, driving around picking them up. And there's one kid, he was in 8th grade, didn't know how to read or write, and was filthy. Like you could smell him from 50 yards away. And I remember one day going to pick him up at his trailer, and he's rummaging through a dumpster next to the trailer looking for food. His mom would disappear for a week, 2 weeks. And his baby sister was filthy. I walked into the trailer, and it was disgusting. Yeah. And I'm shocked. And I pick him up. I pick up this other girl who held her mom in her arms while she died of an OD in a bathtub in her trailer. And so these kids are rough.
So completely foreign from
I grew up in middle class, Fort Worth, Arlington Heights, and within a matter of months, I've got kids waiting in line to get my autograph, playing for the Cardinals. To these kids could care less about baseball. They just they're just desperate for somebody to give them hope that they can get out of here. So by the end of that summer, I got like 25 kids I'm picking up in the bus and, taking them to Pizza Hut, taking them fishing on the lake, took them to Six Flags on a church trip that summer. And I'm like, this is amazing. I am like finding deep meaning in investing in these young people. And by the end of the summer, I'm like, I don't even want to be at the ballpark. I don't want to be teaching people how to hit a baseball. I'm teaching these kids about Christ, not very well, because I was so young. I didn't know a whole lot.
But you were showing up.
I was showing up, and there was an interim pastor. His name was Brother Dwight, and Saint Andre was his last name. This is Louisiana. He was from the South Louisiana, Saint Andre. But he took me under his wing, and he was such a patient guy with me, and I'm learning all this stuff and reading, and I'm reading all these church growth books, and that's when I really started getting into ministry stuff, and he's just patient with me, and that fall, I'm still coaching and I'm still at this church. So I keep going after the end of the summer. I'm like, can I keep going? And they're like, great.
So a summer gig turns into a longer term gig.
But I'm still doing baseball, and it's off season. And I go to this conference called the Catalyst Conference for church leaders in Atlanta. The church allows me to go up there, and I fly up there by myself, and I'm just like blown away at ministry stuff and all the books and then I figured out, I'm like, man, all this leadership stuff I'm getting interested in for coaching can apply to the church. So I really got into this leadership kick, and I'm like, well, I want to be a leader. Every young kid wants to be a leader. And I can be a leader in the church, the whole church growth movement, and Bill Hybels and Andy Stanley, and so I'm like, what? I can do ministry full time and still, quote unquote, be a leader. Which I look back at that and I kind of laugh at that now.
Yeah.
But so by the end of the fall, I tell my coach, who's a believer, that I'm going all in with ministry, and he's like, go for it. So that fall of 2004, I leave baseball and go full time into the ministry, and finish out that semester at this small church. And in the spring of 2005, a friend of mine that I developed a close friendship with that fall was the youth pastor at Summer Grove Baptist Church. He had like 400 kids in his youth group. Super charismatic guy, high energy. He's like, why don't you move up to Shreveport and be an intern? You can stay in the garage house of one of the deacons, and we can't really pay you much of anything, but why don't you move up here and just learn how ministry works? I'm like, I'm in.
Yeah.
So I moved to Shreveport, finished spring of 2005, and that summer in that youth ministry. And then the fall of 2005, the children's pastor leaves Summer Grove Baptist Church, and he had a huge children's ministry. He had like 200 kids, full-blown worship service on Sunday morning, ran the Sunday school for 1st through 5th grade. He leaves out of the blue to move back to his hometown, and they asked me to be the interim children's pastor.
Okay.
So now I'm preaching every week to 200 1st through 5th graders. And running the Sunday school program. I ran VBS that next summer. Now I'm sitting in these like cabinet level meetings with the senior pastor, and I'm still single, and I'm 25, something like that. And now I'm all in. And so to kind of fast forward to give you just some of the logistics, and then you can ask me questions if you want. But so obviously I wasn't called to be a full-time children's pastor, and I really wasn't qualified, to be honest with you, with just my lack of experience. And so I was like, man, I want to get an education. So I did some distance classes from Southwestern Seminary that were in Marshall, Texas. I would drive to Marshall, take some night classes, come back, and then I had a choice to make. It's like I had two opportunities that popped up. One was to move to Dallas to be the single adults pastor.
Okay.
One was to take over for my mentor, who was the FCA director, Gerald Long, He was in his 50s and was running for public office.
Okay.
He's a part of the Long family in Louisiana.
Okay. I don't know what that is.
So Huey Long, there's a movie made about him, but it's like this dynasty of Democrat political.
Oh, really?
But he switched to Republican.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
But that's actually a compliment to the guy that's mentoring you, that
I didn't have a clue about all that. I'm just like, I could have cared less at that time. But now I look back and I'm like, man, I wish I could have asked him so many questions about the political world then. But so he's running for office and is leaving FCA. He'd been doing it for 20 years, maybe more. And they said, we want you to take over for Central Louisiana, 100 high schools and middle schools, 2 universities, and me. And he hadn't really developed a sophisticated board because he used to sell insurance in Louisiana for however many years before he took over. And he's and he's running for public office. He knows everybody. And so he didn't have to really work hard to raise money.
Right.
So so long story short, I wanted to go to Dallas, single capital of the world. I'm single, huge church, single adult pastor. That's what I wanted. Well, that fell through. They ended up not hiring anybody for that. They cut their budget. This was at First Baptist Dallas, before Jeffers got there. And so I chose to move back from Shreveport to Natchitoches, Louisiana, to take over as the FCA director.
Okay.
And that was in 2006. And I did that for 3 years. I met Ari, my wife there, who was playing volleyball at Northwestern State. She'd come to the chapel service I would do every Tuesday night for the athletes.
And she's like, "Man, look at that godly guy right there."
Yeah, I don't know if that's exactly what she was saying, but there was something mysterious about me, and so that's another story for another time how we met and ended up marrying. But I realized pretty quickly that it wasn't the role for me. It was really about fundraising, and you're running a nonprofit now, and it's about building your board. It's about maintaining those relationships, about fundraising. I did a mayor's prayer breakfast where me and the mayor would do stuff in Natchitoches. I did this huge fundraising event where all the schools came to the gym at Northwestern State, and it was an FCA event, and I ran that. And I'm really just checking on all the schools to make sure the supervisors or the sponsors are doing their job at the schools. But I'm not really doing a ton of teaching.
You're not ministry doing what you loved.
I'm running an organization, which I'm not great at, and there was no accountability, which wasn't good for me coming out of baseball, where everything was done. Yeah, everything was so structured. So we got married, Ari and I, in 2008, and pretty quickly we're like, we're going to move. Once she graduated, we're going to move back to Fort Worth, and I'm going to go to seminary at Southwestern.
But by the way, boys thrive in structure. Just to jump in there, you mentioned that boys and even men, like I thrive in structure. Where there is no structure, the wheels come, that's where you run into trouble. You need walls to bounce off of. Like give a boy walls to bounce off of. Here are your walls. Here's the rules. Let them bounce, go crazy.
We go off the reservation.
Or we'll bounce right out of the atmosphere. So go ahead.
No, you're right. And my whole life, everything had been done for me. I didn't learn how to change the oil in my car. I didn't learn how to do anything. I just did baseball. Yeah. That's it. In school and college, I didn't pick my schedule. The athletic department's, counselor did that. Right. Here's what you're taking this semester. Cool. Whatever. They told me when to be in the weight room. And if I wasn't there, then I wouldn't make the team. Like there was so much
everything's dictated.
Built-in, accountability that I was extremely disciplined and structured. But I realized when I left that world how undisciplined and unstructured I was just by, some people would say this is a weakness, and it might be, but I need external pressure. I don't do well when there's not external goals and accountability and structure. I need consequences for not doing the things that I do.
Yeah.
You're grinning over there. What are you thinking?
Well, that's why you get a phone call here and there from Eric, a text. Because you need to know. That's how our friends. It's like you need to know what your friends need from you, and if your friends need, motivation, because once they get motivated, they're off and running through it. All they need is that motivation. Some friends need that constant encouragement, like a consistent encouragement. Some need structure.
It's not motivation. I'm very motivated. It's when I don't know where to channel it.
Right.
It's like being motivated to do 10 different things is not helpful, because you become paralyzed with, what do I do first? And so it's not that I'm not motivated, or I can outwork anybody in certain contexts, but in other contexts it's like, man, I can't get off the...
If you know the project and the structure, and there's a structure toward the project, hey, Tyler, let's work on this. Because we've worked on things together, and you've helped me with like putting classes together and things for Forge Room, and even before that, there's the project, and then once we would go meet when I was doing classes at Christ Chapel, and you would have like 3 or 4 pages of notes of like this, this is what we need to work on and things like that, because you had that project.
I was motivated.
The structure, you were already motivated.
Yeah. It was an area that I was personally motivated in, just intrinsically. Yeah. And then you gave me clear, like, hey,
this
can
is
you get
what
this
I need
done by this time?
Yeah. We're going to meet at this time. This is what I need. I need your help with the A, B, and C.
So if I don't get it done by this time, then I just let you down.
Right.
And so I follow through.
Right.
But if nobody cares and nobody really has set the parameters, the structure, then it's hard for me to like...
It's hard to be motivated, for anyone to be motivated in those.
But especially for someone who, my whole life, my areas have been, most of my jobs have been performative. Meaning baseball is an entertainment, it's performance. Yeah. And so there's a lot of built-in incentives when you're doing things that are performance-based. Like I'm getting up in front of, that alone motivates you to get things done. Yeah. When you start to go into a world where there's a lot of things you have to do, but there's no recognition of that, there's no cost if it's not done, or at least there's no perceived cost, it can become difficult to really put in those extra hours. I did really well in seminary and pursuing my PhD, the classes, because it was so defined. If I don't turn this paper in by this time, I get a 0, and then the game's over. Yeah. It's over. So I would, if I had to stay up for 24 hours, and I'd stay up for 24 hours. Yeah. But if you're telling me I have to stay up for 24 hours, but there's no like reason, man, I'm going to bed. So I might be weird in that way, where I can put out extreme effort and work ethic in some situations, and in others it can seem like, I have trouble getting started. Yeah. So some of it's just the way I'm wired in my past, the experiences I've had, and all of that coming together. And
it's your wiring. But let's go back to. So you're now you're taking seminary classes. The FCA thing is kind of fading.
For 3 years.
Yeah, you're there for 3 years.
Learned a lot about myself in that period. For sure.
You've met Ari.
Met Ari. Had a lot of fun. I mean, it was a great experience.
So now how did you get back to Fort Worth and then Christ Chapel?
Yeah. So we had no job, no place to live, and no money to pay for school. But
this is at Southwestern Seminary.
Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth, Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. But we were confident that this was the next step. And the reason we chose Southwestern over like a Dallas Theological Seminary, really it was those two options, just because we weren't going to move to the other side of the country. It didn't make sense. Was because Southwestern was cheaper, and it was in Fort Worth, and so we could stay with my parents until we, got a place to live and all that. And I thought that was going to be a couple weeks. And it was like 3 months. Yeah. So we're newlyweds, and we're staying in an apartment. At the time, my parents were living in an apartment. Mm-hmm. And we're packed in. Turns out it was such a blessing from the Lord, because Ari's from Brazil, born and raised. at that time, that was 16 years ago, her English wasn't super great. And so it forced my parents and her to get to know each other at a much deeper way than they probably would have if we like moved to Dallas and just visited every once in a while. So it turned out to be great, but it was tough. And the Lord provided with scholarship money. The Lord provided with jobs. I was valet parking, cleaning pools, doing hitting lessons. Ari was able to start teaching after we got her visa situation done.
Because she's from Brazil.
Yep. She was here on a student visa, and she needed to get a permanent residence. That was a whole process that we had anticipated, just weren't thinking about it, young and stupid. But we got that done, and she started teaching at Calvary Christian Academy and coaching volleyball. And we were living in seminary housing, and God just provided every step of the way. And eventually I got a full-time job at the seminary in the student life department. I was running the intramural sports for the seminary and the college. Well, there's a college there too, and was running the chili cook-off and the student life groups. And we created a dodgeball tournament. We had basketball leagues. And so I taught PE for the college. And so it was fun. And I got through my MDiv in 3 years. And so in 2012, I finished my MDiv, and we had our first child at that point, Rachel. And I had several professors say, why don't you stay and do a PhD? We really think, you're wired for that. And I was working on campus, so they'd provide a scholarship money to do that. And I was like, let's do it. And so got into the PhD program in the historical theology, church history department. And within a few months of that, I got hired at Christ Chapel to be the associate Life Stage 2 pastor under Cody McQueen, who was the Life Stage 2 young adult pastor. That was in 2013, summer of 2013.
So the year before I went on staff. I went on summer of 14.
July of 2013. And Cody was like, oh, by the way, we need you to, if your passport's not up to date, you need to get that express whatever done, because you're going on a mission trip to Belize with the Life Stage 2 in a couple weeks. I was like, well, okay, well, I guess
so. Yeah.
And Ari was pregnant with our second at that time.
Oh, wow.
And so that's how I got to Christ Chapel.
So you held a lot of different positions at Christ Chapel, ending up with staff development. What were some of the things I wrote down some notes here? Because now you preached through was Life Stage 2 and 3? Was that Renovate?
Just Life Stage 2.
Life Stage 2.
Yeah, we started Renovate.
And then now at King's Cross you preach, but I just recognized that you started preaching first through fifth graders.
Well, it was first to a bunch of, poor backwoods, middle school and high school kids in Louisiana.
So you were preaching to the youth. So what
every
lessons?
Wednesday night I preached.
Because it seems like there would be
record.
Yeah. So, but you get in that type of an atmosphere of preaching, you're going to carry some lessons whether you're cognitive of it or not.
Oh yeah.
So now you preach, at King's Cross.
Yep.
That's you're the main preacher.
Yep.
What were some of the things that maybe resonated with you back then? Did you ever think, oh, I'd like to be a preacher one day, or was this just?
No, I thought about that.
Okay,
definitely thought about that. But my last year with the Cardinals, I was a utility player. So I was in A-ball in Peoria, Illinois, the Peoria Chiefs. In that season, I played every position but pitcher and center field. And that was going to be, if I was going to make it to the major leagues, it'd be as a utility player. Like once you get that label.
Yeah.
And that just means a guy that can be versatile. And for whatever reason, that's what I became in the church too. I was a children's pastor, a youth pastor, a young adult pastor. I was a college pastor. When I worked for FCA, I was also the college pastor at First Baptist Natchitoches.
Yeah.
I've been a nonprofit director. I've been the director of a residency program, you know, where it's more academic. And then, you know, staff development. I was the small groups pastor, the Connect pastor at Christ Chapel first season. I was the discipleship pastor. So why in the world is God giving me all these experiences? And that was one of the answers to that question was one of the big reasons why I chose church planning. Because it's like, this is where all of that knowledge can come together to help.
The only thing you haven't done is been women's ministry.
I haven't been women's ministry and don't anticipate that happening. Although I live with 4 women, and so in a way I'm a women's pastor.
Okay, good. But go ahead.
And I've been a janitor. I've cleaned the school at Clips.
Yeah,
you know, where my kids go to school.
Okay, so back to being that utility player, generalist, being able to, and I think that plays into. I think that prepares for church planning because
and let me answer your question real quick on the preaching side, because that preaching to 1st through 5th graders week in and week out was awesome because they have the attention span of a gnat.
Yeah.
And if you lose them, it's game over. And so, and being married to my wife, who English is her second language, has also helped me because I can get overly analytical and can definitely complicate things. But I do think some of the positive feedback I get from my preaching is that I'm clear. And I think that clarity came from having to really simplify things, teaching elementary school kids, and then also simplify things in communicating with my wife early on in our marriage. Mm-hmm. And then also, you know, in youth ministry, you just learn to simplify things. And simplify
meaning that you're not, and some people get confused with simplifying something versus
being simplistic.
dumbing it down, being simplistic. Yep. This isn't dumbing things down. This is making things extremely clear
yep.
and accessible to someone.
Yep. And then using illustrations that can connect with the person, the audience. You know,
right.
I had to start thinking about what would be an illustration for this point for a 4th grader.
Yeah.
You know, and so I'm telling, you know, silly illustrations, trying to think back to when I was a kid, what would be funny for an 8-year-old.
Yeah, to hold their attention.
Yeah, and what, you know, talking about Christmas, what would be something that these kids would be like, oh, yeah, you know, their memories, as opposed to a parent thinking about an illustration for Christmas. So just doing that for seasons at different levels, from 1st grade all the way up to, you know, now people... Every stage in life has been helpful.
Yeah.
Very helpful. And that's why I do try to tell there's a lot of young guys that they're in a rush to get that promotion or, you know, move to the next thing. And it's like, you know, learn to do your current job well, and then that'll take care of itself.
Yeah.
So, you know, learn the craft. And quit rushing to get before an audience or a bigger audience. You don't even know what you're doing yet.
Yeah.
You know, I some of these 22-year-olds that are hired at like a Christ Chapel, this giant mega church their expectations are tremendously high. It's like, you have no idea what you don't know. So quit rushing to get the attention you think you deserve or the promotion or the opportunity, and just learn your craft.
Don't skip there are no shortcuts.
Exactly.
You know, there's discipline, and part of that discipline, it takes time.
And like don't say no. When you're new in the ministry, I said yes to everything.
Yeah.
When I was at that small church in Zwolle, Louisiana, living in Natchitoches, that youth pastor in Shreveport, we met for a whole semester before he decided to bring me on. So that fall of 2004, he says, hey, I reached out to him. He spoke at an FCA event, and I was like, I want to get to know that guy. I was blown away. I'm like, I want to learn how to speak like that. And so I went up to him afterwards and said, hey, I want to get to know you, and, you know, whatever it takes. And he's like, great. I meet with a group of high school students on Friday mornings at 6 a.m. Mm-hmm. I'll see you there at 6. So I drive an hour.
Yeah.
On Friday mornings from Natchitoches to Shreveport and meet him there at 6 a.m. And then we would go we would just meet with a bunch of high school kids from a local high school. And then he and I would go meet for breakfast at the Waffle House in Shreveport. And that's where he would talk to me about, who I am and my dreams and all that. But every Friday, my butt is in that little breakfast place, that diner at 6 a.m. I hear a lot of guys are like, oh my gosh, it's too early. I can't make it.
Yeah.
I can't make it. I live in Natchitoches. So
Drive.
He was testing me. How bad do you want to?
Well, anything worth accomplishing
requires sacrifice.
It's going to sacrifice. There's going to be a cost. You're going to have to trade something for something, and it's usually when you're young, it's time.
So I get frustrated sometimes with the younger guys because it's like, hey, can I borrow a book? It's like, no, but you can buy a book. How bad do you want it? If you're taking seminary classes and you're just wanting to borrow all the books for the classes, you're not serious.
Yeah.
That'd be like a carpenter, an apprentice carpenter going to his mentor or whatever and saying, hey, can I borrow your hammer? Mm-hmm. It's like, if you really want to be a carpenter, you need to go buy your own hammer.
Yeah.
And you know what? I'll buy you a hammer, but don't ask to borrow mine. That tells me you're not all in.
Yeah.
And so there's little things that I think a lot of these young guys don't realize how good they have it at a place like Christ Chapel. And you need to see yourself as at the very bottom of the totem pole. And if you get an opportunity, you say yes. Well,
yeah.
I'm not I've got a class, I've got to turn in this homework or whatever tomorrow, so I can't do that. It's like, figure it out.
Yeah.
Stay up later and get your homework done, and then go take that opportunity.
Take advantage of the opportunity. So as we kind of wrap things up, we've talked about the arc of your life, particularly from baseball to being, church planner, pastor. What else would you want to add?
No step along the way has been what I anticipated. Even with baseball, my picture of my baseball path was dramatically different than what it actually was. And yet, a lot of my dreams were accomplished. God blessed me in so many ways. But, we have our conception of our picture of what things are going to be, whether it's ministry or sports or whatever with our kids. And that's fine. But at the end of the day, the Lord's the one that's in control, and there are many plans in a man's heart, but the Lord's purpose will prevail. He had a purpose for me, and my job was to just go through the open doors that he gave me, even if it wasn't exactly what I had hoped. Like Angelina Junior College in Lufkin was not my picture of success in baseball.
Yeah.
Being rejected by every other school known to man, but this little tiny school in the middle of East Texas. But that was the door that was open. Was I willing to go through that door? I battled that because part of me is like seeing all my buddies and fraternities at TCU and Baylor and Texas Tech and Texas, and I'm like, man, they're having a blast, and I'm still keeping in touch with them, and it's like, oh my goodness, it sounds like so much fun, but I wanted to accomplish this goal, and so go through the doors that are open to you. Same with ministry. That definitely wasn't how I pictured it. I just had opportunities, and I prayed about them, sought advice from wise people around me, and then I made a decision to go through this door and not this door. And then I didn't really look back. The only time I look back with baseball is if I go to a baseball game. I can watch it on TV. I can talk about it with my buddies, but when I go to a stadium and smell the grass and hear the crack of the bat, it's hard for me not to think, what if?
Yeah.
But I've learned it was harder early on what if I made the wrong decision? The guy who took my place at Northwestern State as a coach became an assistant coach at Alabama.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That's like top of the food chain, SEC, and now he's a head coach in Division I. I'm like, man, I wonder what could have happened. But now that's just, it's so clear that wasn't the path that God had for me. I don't spend any time.
I think that's a good word because you get to a certain point, and it's not necessarily a point in age. It's not like when you turn 40 or something
Right.
that you have this realization that that you reach a point where God's providence takes over, and you allow. You have dreams and goals, but then it's easy for you to let go of the what ifs. Like I don't have those what ifs anymore about like back to being a DJ or
business
running
world.
and being in the top of the business world. It's like I'm completely at peace whatever God does. So whenever something new comes along, I'm like, this is an awesome opportunity. I have no idea where it's going to go. It doesn't make sense to me right now, but God is good.
And look at how far he's taken us and has preserved us. And he gives us these little reminders.
He's always gives
exactly
you an
where I'm supposed
encouragement.
to be.
Exactly. It'll make some sense, but it takes faith. He's constantly asking us, trust me.
A great example on the way over here, I stopped at QT to get some gas, and I go in to get coffee, and QT changed their little coffee machines, and so it's a little more complicated. And this guy...
So you had to get an 8-year-old to help you?
No, I go there all the time. But this big guy next to me, he looked like he was from South America somewhere. Big guy with kind of a 5 o'clock shadow, and he's looking at the machine, and he's, can't figure it out. And I was like, and I showed him, and then we started talking, and when he was talking, I could tell he's from Brazil, his accent.
Yeah.
I was like, where are you from? He's like, Brazil. And I was like, oh, my wife's from Brazil. And he's like, are you serious? Like, yeah, Belo Horizonte. And he's like, oh, yeah, Minas Gerais. That's the state that Belo Horizonte's in. And he's like, oh, that's cool. And somehow he brought up his daughter, who's older, and he's like, yeah, she just had a divorce, and she's struggling, and she's going through a deep depression, and I don't know why he brought it up to me. But she's very smart. She's in medical school, and I just am really worried about her and all that. And I was like, and I've really been working on this because I'm not good at this. I'm a pastor, and I struggle with this.
Yeah.
With random people to say, can I pray for you?
Yeah.
And so this was one of those moments where I was like, I have to do this. Hey, can I pray for your daughter? He's like, I'm a believer. He said, I'm a Jesus follower.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I was like, yeah, I'm a pastor. And he's like, I'm a pastor. He said, I'm a worship pastor. And we're just like, holy cow. And so we prayed there in QT, and he told me about his daughter, and we exchanged numbers, and it's like, that was just that's so many connections in my life, that just one little moment of, man, God is
guy couldn't work the coffee machine. You could.
And
you
I
both
happened
went
to
there
notice
wanting coffee, and then before you know it, you make a friend that you'll know in eternity.
Yeah, and so it's just it is amazing. Hold your plans loosely.
Yeah,
because it's amazing the plans that God has for us, and I think they're beyond the things I've gotten to do in ministry. I would never have gotten to do if I was a baseball coach. The countries I've been able to go to, the places I've been able to see, the people I've been able to meet, the impact I've been able to make, I just wouldn't change that for the world. And so no matter what you've done in your past that makes you think, oh man, God can still use you, and he's going to take those mistakes you've made in the past to minister to people in the present and in the future. And so don't ever say to yourself that I'm too far gone for God to use me.
That's right.
And there's no telling how he's going to do it.
Amen.
Look at people like me and Lance.
Yeah, amen. Well, that's good. Well, thanks for your time and digging into going through your past and sharing your story.
This was fun.
Yeah, appreciate it. Until next time, man.
All right. God
See
bless you. Bye-bye.